We have 2 members en route, and we'll be able to start within 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, you have one person a minute ago. Gentlewoman from New York walked in, so you should be needing one.
She's here. There are 2 members on the way down, and yeah, one of them is, the moment one of them arrives, we'll get started. Let me ask my staff to do a final count. There's Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Okay. All right, there we go. All right. Welcome everyone to today's hybrid hearing. Pursuant to House rules, some members are going to appear in person here in the room. Others will appear remotely via Zoom. Since some members' witnesses are appearing in person, let me first remind everyone that pursuant to the guidance from the House attending physician, all individuals attending this hearing in person must wear a face mask in the hearing room, regardless of vaccination status, unless you are speaking at the time. So you can remove your mask when recognized by the chair to speak, and then must put the face mask back on when you're listening, and this is in interest of everybody's health. We're hearing way too many cases of people who are vaccinated who are now coming down with the extremely virulent Delta variant. Members who are not wearing a face mask just won't be recognized. So I don't want to get into a big thing about this. Let's use some Texas hospitality and gentility and respect with all these great Texans in the room. Because we may have a mix of vaccinated and unvaccinated people in the room, we must maintain social distancing to protect those people, both those who are not vaccinated and those who are. Let me also make a few reminders for people appearing in person. You will only see members and witnesses appearing remotely on the monitor in front of you when they're speaking in what is known as the speaker view. A timer is visible in the room directly in front of you. For members appearing remotely, I know you're all familiar with Zoom by now, but let me remind you of a few things. First, you'll be able to see each person speaking during the hearing, whether they are in person or remote, if you've got your Zoom set to speaker view. If you have any questions, contact the committee staff. Second, we have a timer that should be visible on your screen. When you're in speaker view, members who wish to pin the timer to their screens should contact committee staff for help. Third, the House rules require that we see you, so please have your cameras turned on at all times. Thank you, members appearing remotely. Fourth, members appearing remotely who are not recognized should remain muted to minimize the background noise and distraction. Fifth, I will recognize all members verbally, but members, of course, retain the right to seek recognition verbally. In regular order, members will be recognized in seniority order for questions. Finally, if you want to be recognized outside of regular order, you can do that in a few different ways. You can use the chat function, you can send an email to the majority staff, or you can unmute your mic to seek recognition verbally. Obviously, we do not want people talking over each other, so my preference is that members use the chat function or email to facilitate formal verbal recognition. Committee staff will ensure that I'm made aware of your requests. We'll begin the hearing in just a moment when they tell me they're ready to begin the live stream.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would like to make an unanimous consent request, and that is that today we have 3 members who one who does not sit on the committee and 2 that do. I would like to ask that unanimous consent that Mr. Congressman Chip Roy, Congressman Michael Cloud, and Congressman Pat Fallon be allowed to participate and that be waived onto the subcommittee to participate fully in this hearing.
Great. I'm sorry, did you say Representative Fallon, Representative Cloud, and Representative Roy?
That would be correct, 3.
Good. Well, without objection, those 3 members will be permitted to join the hearing and be recognized for the sole purpose of questioning the witnesses. And we welcome you and thank you for coming. And we may have a couple others who are joining us as well. Is the live stream ready? I'm asking the staff. Yeah. Okay. Where's my gavel? All right. The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. And without objection, pursuant to the motion by Mr. Sessions, Representatives Fallon, Cloud, and Roy shall be permitted to join the hearing and be recognized for the purpose of questioning witnesses. Welcome, Mr. Roy. We're here today to talk about the voting bills that are currently pending in the Texas legislature and how those bills are related to other voter suppression proposals in states across the country, specifically targeting voters of color and other vulnerable communities. While we're lucky to have Texas legislators joining us today who are on the front lines of the fight to defend voting rights in their state, I also wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to hear from Texas voters who are affected by this potential legislation. Let's take a moment to listen to some public testimony given by a few of those voters during hearings on these bills earlier this year.
My name is Alexander Montalvo from Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm here representing myself and a member of Indivisible Tex Ledge. We're a grassroots organization that educates and motivates Texans to vote, organize, and engage to create a Texas legislature that reflects the diversity of Texas. And banning public officials from taking proactive steps to ensure Texans get mail-in ballots is voter suppression, plain and simple. Banning drive-through voting and options for 24-hour and late-night voting are also voter suppression. I think of my 70-year-old father who served in the Army and Reserves not being able to use any of these three options. Being able to vote by mail, drive-through, or in an earlier or later time to ensure the lack of a line are important for him and others to have in our state.
My name is Amatula Contractor, and I'm here to ask you all to oppose HB 3. I live in Harris County, and I wanted to share a personal experience with the voting in the 2020 general election. I voted at midnight at a 24-hour polling location, which is a measure that this bill seeks to restrict, and I cannot understand why. Throughout the entire process, I could not tell you one thing that was really different about voting at midnight versus voting in the day besides the color of the sky. While I was in line, I decided to strike up conversation with the folks waiting with me, and that's when it truly dawned on me how important accessibility was in voting. For the college students who are in class all day, for the shift workers who wake up at 4 a.m. but they want to do their civic duty before they head to work. Voting accessibility is essential to our democracy, and the undue burdens on voting that this bill seeks to place on we the people, and specifically we the people of color, means that our lawmakers are deliberately trying to keep this democracy from working for all of us. Elections are sacred. My right to vote is very sacred. And for me to be able to vote at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and to be able to exercise that right, for me, that time is very sacred.
So that's a representative sample of hundreds of voters who have spoken up against the legislation in Texas. It is up to us now in Congress to listen to the cries for help that are coming from Texas and from other states, and to take action on comprehensive voting rights legislation in the House and in the Senate. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement, then go to my friend, Mr. Sessions, for his opening statement. Good morning, and I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today on the occasion of this truly historic hearing. And we know it's taken a lot for you to get here, and we appreciate very much your being here and helping to educate Congress and the country about what's going on in Texas. Before we get into that, though, I want to take a moment, and I think it's not inappropriate, to mark the passing of a great voting rights hero and a great hero of mine, Bob Moses, who died on Sunday. And Bob Moses was a graduate student in mathematics and philosophy at Harvard in 1960, when he opened up the newspaper and he saw pictures of students sitting in from North Carolina AT&T at lunch counters in the South. And he said, those students look the way that I feel. And he knew that he had to go down south to participate in the civil rights movement, the struggle for people to be on a plane of equality as citizens. And when he got down to Mississippi, he thought he was going to be involved in a movement to try to desegregate the lunch counters and the restaurants. And he talked to a man down there named Amzie Moore, who was the head of the local NAACP, and he said, you know, we don't really need people sitting in the restaurants and lunch counters. And Bob Moses said, well, what do you need? And he said, well, when you look around, what do you see? And he said, I see beautiful terrain and trees and people. And he said, this is a congressional district that is 2/3 African American, and less than 1% of the black people down here are registered to vote because of the grandfather clauses and the literacy tests and the poll taxes. And the local Democratic Party, a racist party structure, has excluded African Americans from voting. And that's what launched Bob Moses on his crusade with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to desegregate Mississippi and Alabama and the rest of the South and the country. And it was that struggle that gave us the phrase, one person, one vote. Each person has a right to vote. And of course, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organized people to register at great personal risk. Bob Moses was nearly killed several times by Klansmen, by sheriffs, by people who came to attack him. Of course, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were killed during the Freedom Summer that SNCC organized. But Bob Moses never gave up the struggle for people, for people's voting rights, and went on also to create the Algebra Project, saying that the right to know mathematics is also a fundamental civil right in our country. So I wanted to note that and observe that, and I wanted to start on a bipartisan note, that the struggle for the right to vote has been a struggle against all political parties in our history, and nobody has clean hands here when you look at it historically. The question is whether we are willing to commit ourselves to a struggle that extends the right to vote for everyone. It's not a partisan question. It's a question about small d democracy for everybody. So earlier this year, legislators in Texas unveiled perhaps the most aggressive set of proposals for voting restrictions anywhere in the country, 65 different anti-voter bills, dramatic restrictions on mail-in voting, vastly increased criminal liability for people who help their family or their friends to vote or bring their ballots to the mailbox, increasingly stringent voter ID requirements, and more criminalization of what goes on in the polling place, enhanced protections for partisan poll workers who set out to intimidate voters, and additional limits on how election officials encourage voters to participate. At one point, and somebody's going to have to explain this to me, it's made a crime to encourage people to vote. I think if I'm reading this proposal correctly, they make it a crime to encourage people to vote. I don't see how that possibly can square with the First Amendment of the United States. I openly encourage people to vote all over the country and in Texas right now. Can that actually be a crime, to do it either on TV or in the social media or in person, talking to people, encouraging them to vote? There was even, I think in the first draft of this legislation, an effort to restrict early voting hours on Sunday, a clear attempt, at least as it was read in Texas, to undercut and hamstring black churches, which ran souls to the polls turnout operations. All of this is taking place despite zero evidence of mass voter fraud in Texas. None of it. Lots of invocations of integrity of the ballot, purity of the ballot. Well, those are code words that go back centuries now. I mean, some people see impurity of the ballot when they see people they don't like voting. So we want to get to the bottom of that. Is there widespread voter fraud in Texas that this is responding to, or is something else going on? One thing I read about was that a Texas legislator introduced just this month a bill calling for a forensic audit of the state's 2020 results, but only in large counties won by President Biden. And when asked why he had not included all the counties in Texas, he said, quote, "What's the point? I mean, all the small counties are red." How can that be consistent with our bipartisan, I'll go beyond that, nonpartisan? Let's not even say bipartisan, because a lot of people are sick of both of the parties. How about just a nonpartisan commitment for everybody to have the right to vote unimpeded, without jumping through all of these hoops? Democratic state representatives in Texas, including our witnesses today, organized a walkout in May to deny Republicans a quorum at the end of their session, preventing passage of the voting bill that would strip their constituents of access to the ballot. In response, Governor Abbott convened a special session on July 8th to pass this sweeping, draconian new election overhaul. Democrats once again denied the legislature a quorum, this time by coming here, petitioning the U.S. Congress for a redress of grievances, demanding the attention of a country that is committed to fairness in voting, to come to urge us to protect their voting rights. And they've done this at great personal cost, at great personal risk, by leaving their families behind. And I, for one, salute them for their courage in being here today. But blocking a quorum is not a permanent solution to the problem of efforts to disenfranchise people and suppress the vote in America. They're here to ask us to act, and we must pass the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The cost of inaction will be devastating for our democracy. The voting restrictions in Texas will strike at the heart of democracy in that great state. Restrictions on voter assistance will potentially criminalize normal interactions between friends and family members who may require assistance to cast a ballot because they're not proficient in English, because they need a ride to the polls. It could have devastating consequences, especially in the Latino community. You cannot out-organize a law that criminalizes you for trying to help your grandmother vote. Limits on what local election officials can do to prevent intimidation by partisan poll workers will also leave minority voters vulnerable. Just last year, leaked video showed GOP Texas officials aimed to organize election integrity brigades of 10,000 largely white poll watchers to monitor communities of color in Houston. Imagine how many brigades there will be once poll workers have, as the ACLU of Texas puts it, a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card for voter intimidation. Because there's a remarkable provision, I've never seen anything like it, in this legislation which says that a partisan poll worker cannot be removed from the polls until they've already been warned once for violating the law. So they get one free bite at the apple to violate the law, and I do want to ask the witnesses about that. Finally, this bill prohibits reforms that were successfully implemented last year by Harris County, such as drive-through voting and 24-hour voting, that were mainly utilized by African American and Latino voters. The Texas Civil Rights Project estimates that over half of all ballots cast using those methods were cast by voters of color. So this zealous pursuit of a massive draconian crackdown on voting is now a national crisis. According to the Brennan Center, 18 states have enacted 30 laws restricting voting rights so far this year. More are on the way. Congress has to act. We have a responsibility to guarantee the people of the United States a Republican form of government. And I'm sorry, my dear friends, that's not a capital R Republican, it's a small r. It's a Republican form of government, a representative form of government where everyone can vote and participate. And they can choose Republicans or Democrats or Libertarians or Independents, whatever else. But the point is, the people get to decide. We don't get to micromanage and gerrymander the electorate. We have to fight back against this new campaign for voter suppression, sparked by the big lie. The same big lie which brought chaos and violence down on this institution and this Capitol just 6 months ago. And for anyone who has not watched our valiant police officers describe what took place on that day, I beseech you to do so. Regardless of what you think your views are now, I beg you to go and watch what they went through as they were assaulted with baseball bats, steel pipes, flag poles, bear spray, mace for 4 or 5 hours defending our democracy. And all of that took place to so-called stop the steal in the name of the big lie, which is that President Biden did not actually defeat Donald Trump by more than 7 million votes, which he did. This wave of legislation, I think, grows out of that same poisonous soil of the big lie. The future of democracy is in our hands. So with that, I offer my friend, Mr. Sessions, the time that he needs to make his opening statement, and then we will go to our witnesses. Mr. Sessions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that because this is a hearing specifically about Texas, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to have Governor Greg Abbott's order about that special session entered into the record.
Without any objection at all. Thank
you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the work of the state of Texas is very important, and the people of the state of Texas have duly qualified and elected individuals who would represent them. It has become a common cited effort that people, when they know they do not have the votes, to leave, to walk out, to not participate. And I don't know where all this came about, but I know that here in Washington, D.C., we do not have the votes to win any single vote, so to speak. None. But Republicans don't walk out. We don't go and accuse people of things just because we are losing. And I would suggest to you that what is happening today in Texas is the rights of all Texans are being withheld because members of the Democratic Party who are members of the state House choose not to be a part of it. So the question is, what is some of this that's being withheld? Well, one of them is the election integrity bill. We're going to talk about that election integrity bill in detail. And I think that anyone that listening to this will recognize that the strength of any majority or member of that body to bring forth a bill that they believe would be important is important. Whether it's complete or not, that process would involve each of the members who would be here to offer amendments to that to change it. But members are still allowed to represent their particular constituents with what they do. Second, border security. As a result of President Biden's decision on January 20th to literally tell federal law enforcement officers that they will not enforce the laws, the border laws, the immigration laws, and the common sense laws of this country has placed a tremendous burden, and it is an emergency in Texas. Over 1 million illegal immigrants have entered the United States. Record numbers of drugs are coming in the United States. And essentially, these federal officers that were there to protect the United States of America, not just our sovereignty, but to protect people who might live in my hometown of Waco, Texas, from drug cartels that are sending record levels of fentanyl, cocaine, and meth to our American cities and homes. Third, family violence education is now not moving forward in Texas. This is based upon their ability to provide appropriate and more education to middle and high school students about dating violence, domestic violence, and child abuse, to recognize that what is happening in this country is we have a crisis in our homes. One could say because of COVID, I say because of the changing times. And we need to use our schools to educate our students about these circumstances. Number three, youth sports. There is going to be a bill that is presented that disallows a student from competing in university interscholastic league athletic competitions designed for students of the opposite sex. I believe it's fair to have the debate and a vote and to see the different ideas that come forth about that opportunity where people of one sex would compete against another person of that sex that I believe is unfair to women. I think it's an anti-women circumstance that we're involved in. I had children. I competed when I was in high school, and it's unfair to have a 17-year-old boy compete against a 17-year-old girl in most sports. 13th check. This is legislation that the House has before it to give teachers a 13th check during the year, allowing teachers a chance to have not only more supplemental payments and benefits, but it's to allow them at a time when more money is available in the teacher retirement system, but it requires the legislature to act. Next, property tax relief. The proposal is to allow the legislature to provide appropriations from general fund to give property tax relief to all Texans. These are important issues that need to be done, the business of the people of the state of Texas. And today, in essence, we're allowing and coddling people who should be at work in the state of Texas, their constitutional duties, and yet we're treating them as hometown heroes in Washington, D.C. I believe that they need to have their constitutional duties performed and be back home. Now, Mr. Chairman, Texas has been a pioneer in passing early voting laws that began in 1988 in Texas. But I would say to you that Texas has used every 2 years for the legislature to be able to strengthen these laws and to provide feedback and to allow Texans the opportunity to vote. I would note that Texas allows 17 days more of early voting than Delaware, which is where our president is from. Texas allows each Texan 17 days more than the state of Delaware. These bills that will be talked about today keep the ability for disabled or elderly persons to vote curbside. That's important to me. I have a disabled son. Perhaps my son may or may not want to go inside. He can stay outside, and it allows that. We need to also remember that these discussions are discussions open to amendment. These bills would make sure that voters have a right to cure their absentee ballots of mistakes. And they're given in these bills up to 6 days after the election to be able to cure a mistake if you had one. This is a far cry from Democrats' claim that the vote is being suppressed. It actually allows them an opportunity to figure out if they had done something wrong. That is common in both the Senate and the House bills. Transparency is necessary in elections, and this bill guarantees elections observers free from any political persuasion. We heard our chairman today lament that partisan poll workers would be discouraged. Let me repeat. He believes evidently that partisan poll workers should be involved in that process. We disagree in Texas. We think anyone that comes to vote should be free of partisan poll workers engaged in an election site. We believe that Texas Democrats understand these bills because many of the people and several of the people that are here today sought amendments to those amendments, and they were accepted in the bills and the processes that have gone on. One member has been a member of the legislature for a number of years and no doubt knows that the laws of Texas that are updated every 2 years are done in the best interest of all Texans. But rather than continuing the debate, they broke quorum and they're trying to paralyze this progress that would be made on behalf of all Texans. Mr. Chairman, I hope today that the testimony that we are going to offer today from a State Representative Clarity, in particular, will allow those elected representatives who are Republicans in Texas a chance to set the record straight about not only what is in these bills, but the need to make sure that Texas works together and passes these laws for the benefit of all Texans. I yield back my time.
Mr. Sessions, thank you so much. We have two other opening statements. We have the chair of the of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, Ms. Maloney, and she is now recognized for her opening statement.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Raskin, for convening today's urgent and vital hearing. I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue and your enduring commitment to the legacy of our late Chairman, Elijah Cummings, and our late colleague, Representative John Lewis, who both fought tirelessly to protect Americans' right to vote. This is a historic hearing, not just because of our distinguished witnesses, but because of the brave actions they took to defend the rights of Texans against one of the most aggressive attempts at voter suppression we have seen anywhere in the country. Now more than ever, we must follow their example to ensure that these shameful attacks on the right to vote do not succeed. We must fight to fulfill the American promise that voters choose their elected representatives rather than politicians picking their own voters. When it comes to restricting the right to vote, our nation has an ugly past. Historical voter suppression measures included threats of lynching, poll taxes, and literacy tests. Today, Texas remains the hardest state in the entire country for Americans to vote. Texans has repeatedly refused to implement reforms that would support greater voter engagement. In 2013, the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County versus Holder blocked the Department of Justice from overseeing elections in places that historically discouraged and suppressed the votes of Black, Latino, and other communities of color. Since that decision, Texas has renewed its voter suppression with a vengeance. It has closed 750 polling sites, including 452 polling sites in counties with the largest increases in Black
wearing their masks when they're not speaking. It's now my great privilege and honor to introduce our witnesses today. Our first witness is the Honorable Senfronia Thompson, Texas State Representative and member of the Select Committee on Constitutional Rights and Remedies of the Texas Legislature. Then we will hear from Nina Perales, who's Vice President of Litigation at the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Next, we'll hear from the Honorable Nicole Collier, Texas State Representative and Chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Next, we'll hear from the Honorable Travis Clardy, who's a representative in the Texas State Legislature. We affirm that the testimony you're about to give us is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
I do.
Let the record demonstrate that the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. Thank you very much. Without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. With that, Representative Thompson, you are now recognized for your testimony. Before you begin, I want to recognize also the presence of our distinguished colleague from Texas, Ms. Lizzie Fletcher from Houston. Representative Thompson, you're recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Raskin and Ranking Member Sessions. We were honored to see our colleagues from Texas. Pete Sessions, it's always good to see you. Chippewa came over early, and we had an opportunity to chat with him for a moment. And of course, we are happy to see the new freshman colleague up here in Pat Fallon. We miss him in Texas, but we know he's doing a good job up here. Mr. Chairman, I was sitting there listening to the comments, opening statements that was made, and I had to take a step back and kind of look at the history that I have been able to perceive in Texas, but it is very difficult for me to look at the history or the progress that maybe African Americans may have made in this country without looking back at the struggles that we have gone through and the struggles that we keep going through. I can understand